Well, I'm talking to you right at the end of the parliamentary season. I wanted to start by addressing the question, which is that it seems to go round and round and round in an endless circle of nonsense. We have yet more debates, yet more agonies about the illegal migration bill, which is now finally law, yet more complaints about Keir Starmer's timidity. It just seems to go on, and you might get the impression that nothing is really changing. Well, below the surface, there has been one absolutely significant change, which is that almost across the entire Conservative Party, as well as the rest of politics, there is a sense that we are now in the final days of the Tory hegemony. That long, long period is coming slowly to an end, and we are living, if you like, through the prologue or the preface of the next Labour government already. Now, I should say that Rishi Sunak does not agree with this. I saw him very, very recently, and he is the bounciest, smiliest candidate for heavy defeat that I have ever met. He hasn't given up, but an awful lot of his party have. Now, this is going to be very, very difficult, of course, for Keir Starmer now, because I think everybody is treating the Labour Party and its leader in a new way as effectively the candidate Prime Minister who deserves, quite rightly, a much steelier, more obsessive scrutiny than he's had so far. And the problem, of course, he has is that because of Rachel Reeves's determination to impose austere fiscal discipline on the party, he has virtually no money to spend, which in opposition means he can make no promises about anything. And so the real problem is, how do you appear to be radical? How do you appear to offer hope and change and optimism when you cannot spend a bean? Now, we saw a really, really good example of this in his interview with Laura Kuenssberg. I was really struck by two aspects of this. She asked him the completely reasonable question about whether or not he agreed with Rishi Sunak's decision to give public sector workers the pay rises that the independent pay review bodies had suggested. And so the question was, what would Starmer do? Would he agree with it or not agree with it? And he literally could not answer.
This is the government's mess, and it's for them to sort it out.
Now, in one sense, you might say perfectly reasonable. This is their mess. This is their problem. It's not Keir Starmer's problem. But for all the public sector workers looking and watching and wondering what he thought about their pay entitlement, it must have looked really, really terrible. So that was point one. Point two, which he then went on to ask about the two-child policy. This is a cap on benefits for families who have more than two children, first introduced by George Osborne in the austerity years to save money. And also, many people think, to discourage poorer families from having more than two children.
How can we justify a system where people in work have to consider the full financial costs of having another child, while those out of work don't?
It has been seen by researchers who've looked at this closely since as an important driver of really, really serious child poverty. Tens of thousands of families driven into genuine poverty by the cap on benefits of that kind. And up to now, we have always assumed that the Labour Party was going to reverse that policy. Almost every single member of the Labour front bench has said that they would reverse it, including, in the past, Keir Starmer. And when he was asked by Laura Kuenssberg what he would do, he replied like this.
We're not changing that policy.
You're not changing the two-child policy benefits.
Now, that is absolutely extraordinary. This is a key policy about driving down child poverty in this country. Remember, going back to Tony Blair and Keir Starmer appeared for the first time this week on the same platform in public. Tony Blair's great crusade was against child poverty, and now we have Keir Starmer's Labour Party saying they will not promise to reverse a policy which drives child poverty to ever higher levels. This is unbelievable, and it's caused a great deal of pain inside the Labour Party. I've talked to a large number of frontbenchers and many backbenchers, and I haven't yet been able to find a single person who likes this change of policy, who approves of the fact that Labour are not going to reverse the two-child policy. It has won Keir Starmer some support. The Times newspaper, quite a lot of right-of-centre journalists, including some on The Sun, for instance, approve of the fact that he's really tough and he's standing up to the left and he's showing himself a man of steel. And this fiscal discipline is real. They will like that. And it may very well be that in the country, eventually, people prefer a Labour Party which is not going to eradicate child poverty by lifting the cap. Because if you look at the policy itself, it's actually quite popular. It's even more popular than unpopular among Labour voters. So Starmer might be making quite shrewd, steely, tough choice about that. He said when he was on stage with Tony Blair,
we keep saying collectively as a party we've got to take tough decisions. And in the abstract, everyone says, that's right, Keir. And then we get a tough decision. We've been in one of those for the last few days, say, well, don't like that. Can we just not make that one? I'm sure there's another tough decision somewhere else that we could make. But we have to take the tough decisions.
And you can sort of see his point. But it did seem to me that this was a very good example of a huge trap being set for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party between now and the general election, whether it comes in May next year or September or October next year or even in January 2025, the very latest possible date. And the trap is simply this. Either he abides by fiscal discipline, as he's doing, and doesn't offer anything at all, in which case you think, what's the point? People are already talking about Starmer's Labour Party being like a kind of limper version of the Tories. Where is the change? Where is the hope? Where is the optimism? What's the point of campaigning for them? On the one hand. On the other hand, if he does start to offer uncosted spending commitments, it's back to the same old Labour. We told you they're going to raise taxes, they're going to raise borrowing. Borrowing is already at historic levels. Taxes are already at levels we haven't seen since the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. So there isn't an awful lot of scope another way. So in other words, you're either irresponsible or you're pointless. Which is it? And so the danger is, I guess, that we see disappointment piled on disappointment, no piled on no, piled on no, so that there is a general air of utter disillusion about Labour even before the general election. And if he does become Prime Minister, that's how he will start, as the guy who is incredibly disappointing. And I offer three possible ways out of that trap. The first is to concentrate on things that don't cost too much money. Tony Blair told me recently that he had focused on social changes that matched the zeitgeist, things like gay marriage, because they didn't cost much money and they showed that New Labour was in tune with the times. Now, for Keir Starmer, there are modern 2020 equivalents of that. For instance, he wants to rip up the planning system to allow onshore wind farms as part of the green revolution. That doesn't cost much money and it would make a big difference. For my money, the bigger change still is the proposed changes to the curriculum so that working class kids are taught how to speak and address themselves in public more effectively and are also given art and music and other cultural lessons that are being stripped out of the curriculum at the moment. So those are really big changes he can make. Talk about the things that aren't going to cost money, that are going to make a difference. Point one. Point two, and perhaps much more important, is to talk about the direction of travel. He keeps saying growth is his big obsession. And the reason for that is, as the economy grows, there is more money to spend for government. There is more, in the fashionable phrase, headroom. And I think if he's able to say, not simply when he's asked about the two-child policy, no, I can't promise that, but to say, look, as money becomes available, we are going to go in a new direction of travel. Until growth comes to the economy, there isn't going to be money to spend. But as soon as growth does come, Labour will spend it in different ways. Labour would not be a party thinking about abolishing inheritance tax. Labour would not be a party spending money on the Rwanda scheme for migrants. Labour would be a party spending money on removing the two-child cap, on spending more in schools and more on frontline services in the NHS. And bit by bit, you might not notice much in the first few months or even the first year or two of a Labour government, but over the course of 5 or 10 years, a government with different spending priorities produces a country that simply feels very different. And I think they should be emphasising this far more than they are. So I said there were 3 ways out of the trap. That's 2. The third way is simply to pick a really big argument that matters, be on the right side of it and fight it and win it. And for me, the overwhelming argument at the moment is still about climate change. We look around us at the moment and we are seeing record-breaking temperatures right around the world, from China to Africa to the Mediterranean. And we're going to just see more and more of this. We understand the effects on Mediterranean tourism. We know that the summers get hotter. What we haven't yet seen really is the full effect of the massive, massive migrations that are about to come because of climate change in Africa. We haven't seen the huge impacts on food production of all kinds, from olives and tomatoes to food and wheat right across Europe, caused by climate change. Food is going to get a lot more expensive. People are going to be on the move in much greater numbers. And then there's the rising sea levels and all the rest of it. For me, this is the huge existential challenge of our time. And it's not going to be an easy argument to win either, because if you look at the row over tree huggers, for instance, and you look at public hostility to Just Stop Oil, who can be incredibly irritating and whose tactics, I think, are often self-defeating, nonetheless, you still see a very rooted anti-environmentalist, anti-net zero bias inside the political economy and particularly inside the media. This, for me, is the really, really big argument of our times. And for people who say, well, Labour looks a bit pointless these days, my answer is they must grasp this argument. They all understand it. They all believe in it. They must grasp this argument. They must have it vividly day after day across the political world and across the media. So, to sum up, find a big argument and fight it and win it. This is the big argument. Pick this one, fight it, win it. And if not that one, which? If you'd like to stay up to date and you'd like to see the latest explainers, field reports, feature stories and special discussion episodes, then please, folks, subscribe to our channel today.
Brought to you by Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Experienced wealth managers who go above and beyond to guide and support you. Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow.